All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing the ayah. So, yesterday we talked about al-wasiyah. We went in certain details in regards to al-wasiyah and when somebody dies, what is it that we have to do after someone dies, and how do we relate to will? How do we relate to the different debts that someone owns? How do we relate with those that are dying, hospice care, and of course, the tubes and all of that. That's really just a fast overview. There's definitely a lot more details than that, so don't depend on that lecture for giving any fatwa to anyone. So that was just giving you an idea of what we're talking about. And of course, we're still in that آية يا أيها الذين آمنوا شهادة بينكم إذا حضر أحدكم الموت حين الوصية اثنان ذوي عدل منكم. So we talked about the story of the two one Sahabi, Tamim al-Dari. I was also searching Adi ibn Badda, and there were some scholars that said that he had become Muslim later on, but then you had other scholars that said that he didn't become Muslim. So I would say his Islam and whether he is a Sahabi, whether he did become Muslim or not, there's a debate between scholars. But for Tamim al-Dari, for sure, he had become Muslim and later narrated at least what had happened to that utensil that they had basically kept away from the son or the slave boy from Bani Sam. Okay, let's see. يا أيها الذين آمنوا شهادة بينكم, and of course الترمذي, and I want you to look at over here. You could see that الدارقطني, and I believe it was al-Bukhari as well. They would narrate a story, and then you would see, for example, الترمذي would narrate a story that may have similar similar information, and sometimes there would be other additions. So you would see, for example, Tafseer al-Qurtubi. Tafseer al-Qurtubi would be in 21 volumes, or perhaps you might go to another tafsir, it would be even bigger, etc. So you want to, I guess, see that sometimes they may take the whole quote for, let's say, a narration that Tirmidhi had narrated, and they might mention the whole quote. And that way, so you could see what he had said and basically make it available to you. But you want to keep in mind that a whole quote is very often of course, copied or shared, but you want to keep in mind that before they didn't used to necessarily put the exact page number or where they got it from. They'll just say, well, Tirmidhi had narrated. The reason why they didn't used to do that is because they didn't have publishing companies. Everything was handwritten. And because everything was handwritten, of course, it wasn't easy to necessarily have everybody's handwriting basically be based on the same number of pages, the same number of etc., and or same number of volumes. So that's why he will just say Rawat Tirmidhi, but then later on during our times, because of the publishing companies, you would have what is called al-muhaqqiq. Then they would basically state the references, and those are the references and where they got this from, and so forth. So you could see some information in those references, at least from the modern scholars that went over these tafsir or these books to give you an idea of where the resources, the references to go back to these stories. Okay, so روى الترمذي عن تميم الداري. So here we go. Tirmidhi right now has another narration, but this narration is of Tamim al-Dari himself. Now remember, Tamim al-Dari was was the Christian friend at the time, along with Adi ibn Badda. So he basically had mentioned the story, and he said that they were basically two Christians going to the Levant. When we're talking about the Levant, it was predominantly Christian. We're talking about Syria, we're talking about Jordan, we're talking about Palestine, we're talking about Lebanon. Those are the Bilad al-Sham. They were called the Levant. They were just considered as one area. There were no borders. So until the time of today, you would be really surprised how similar the cultures are between these countries, whether we're speaking about food, we're speaking about accents, we're talking about perhaps cultures, etc., all these different things. Until the time of today, you will see that the things are really similar. Even when it comes to the Christian denominations, even within those areas, you've got the Christian denominations are pretty much the same. The Syrian, you've got the Arman, well, the Arman, they actually came from elsewhere, but you also have the Orthodox and you have the Mormons, etc. All of those Christian denominations, they're pretty much the same Christian denominations that rate and date back and basically have pretty much the same rating, or at least the same grouping, the same followers. But of course, a lot of these followers had become Muslim, so they were not forced into Islam. That's why you would still see Christians. You would see Palestinian Christians, Lebanese Christians, Syrian Christians, and even Syrian Jews, by the way. You have a lot of Syrian Jews as well, from Dimashq. And yes, I had actually seen a lot of Syrian Jews in Palestine, Iraqi Jews, Egyptian Jews, Tunisian Jews, Algerian Jews, Libyan Jews, Moroccan Jews. You will even find them in Palestine and even in high ranking positions, even in the Israeli government. Okay, so at the time, of course, Bilad al-Shem was predominantly Christian, and the other, let's call them societies, whether we're speaking about perhaps Al-Jazeera al-Arabiya, they were pagan. Okay. And why were they pagan and not necessarily Christian? So Christianity was number one, of course, predominantly with coming from the heart, which basically is Palestine. And of course, those were the nearby regions in the Levant. So you could say that that was pretty much the foundation of Christianity, which is Bilad al-Sham. And from Bilad al-Sham, you had Christianity spread around the world. Later on, of course, with whether it's Saint Augustine or whether it's the later, of course, the Roman Empire or Byzantine Empire later on, embracing Christianity, of course, then spreading to the rest of the world. So in other words, even Christianity was Bilad al-Sham based. Okay, so just think of that. Okay, so Bilad al-Sham based, and you're talking about Islam, the Prophet ﷺ, just think of that. I want you to kind of relate to a number of different things. Even when the Prophet ﷺ, even though he was from Quraysh or from Mecca, but he still aimed at Bilad al-Sham because he recognized that Bilad al-Sham, in general, the Levant is actually considered as the foundation, as the area that basically changes and has the potential to change the world. Okay, think of that. That it has the potential to change the world because of its one, geographical importance, political importance, and certainly the resources there and so forth. So even though Iraq was available because the government was already a collapsing government, at least in the Persian Empire, but the Prophet ﷺ still wasn't aiming there. He was sending Usama ibn Zayd to the Levant to the Levant, and in fact, he had made the will to continue the path that way because he recognized and he knew that Bilad al-Sham was not only a sacred place, but was a strategic place to bring about the control to the rest of the world. Okay, that's why the Prophet ﷺ, if you were to also see the different ahadith that relate to the signs of Judgment Day, the change, the political changes, it was always Bilad al-Sham. When Isa alayhi salam would come down, it would be in Bilad al-Sham. When al-Mahdi would be praying, he would be in Bilad al-Sham, in Dimashq in particular. It was always Bilad al-Sham, Bilad al-Sham. It was going to be for the rest until Judgment Day as the main place of change, the main change, political changes, religious changes. It was Bilad al-Sham. So just think of that. Now, when they were going for Bilad al-Sham, يختلفان إلى الشام, it doesn't mean يختلفان meaning they were in dispute. No, يختلفان actually means that they were traveling. Okay, and that was before Islam, of course. They came to Bilad al-Sham, and Bilad al-Sham because, and keep this one in mind, any country that has more more sea areas, and of course it's in the middle of course, you're talking about different countries. You're talking about, of course, why is Bilad al-Sham this important? Because it was considered and still is considered as the main entrance, as an exit to the outside world. So it was an entrance, an exit, a main exit, and it was a lot easier to go through the sea to basically sail other places than actually on ground. Okay, so just think of that. Now, it was considered as a main entrance and an easier entrance than perhaps Yemen. Okay, we'll talk about Yemen in just a bit. So Bilad al-Sham, through, of course, going the Mediterranean, it's definitely not as rough. It's a sea, but definitely not as rough as an ocean. Okay, not as rough as an ocean. So through the Mediterranean, they were capable of sailing to the other sides of North Africa, to Europe, to, of course, the other areas of Europe, and certainly bringing in goods. And not only that, even in the Levant, of course, they were also capable of going southwards, which basically would mean at least a safer area by going through the Red Sea, because the Levant through Aqaba and through, let me get, maybe I should show you the map so we could really see it, okay? So we're going to put Middle East map, okay? And let's see it right there so we could see what Bilad al-Sham looks like and give us an idea right there. So I want you to see it right there. Here we go. You could see that, right? So if you look at Bilad al-Sham, all of this is considered Bilad al-Sham, okay? And if you look at Lebanon, you look at Syria, Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and Palestine, they were all considered Bilad al-Sham. All of this splitting of Syria, Lebanon, etc., that did not exist until 1917. Okay, until 1917, when Sykes-Picot, basically the colonizing powers, they split all of this. So we, even in Palestine, we have a lot of families that originate from Syria, originate from Jordan, or originate from Lebanon. And they're literally called عيلة الطحان. They are actually from Syria. عيلة السمان. We have عيلة السمان in Palestine, believe it or not. I don't know if they're related to your husband, Noura, but we have the family of Saman in Palestine. I don't know if they're related, but they actually say that they come from Syria. We have families, they're called al-Beiruti. They come from Beirut. They're living in Palestine. We have many families that actually come from different parts. And we even have Kurdish families, but those ones came later with Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. We have Iraqi families. that also came from different parts. So we even have Yemeni families. So that's a completely different story to talk about. But why Bilad Shem? You could see right there that it was an easier exit. You could see it's a very long coast, and this long coast allowed Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine to find an easier way to sail to North African countries and even European countries. And even if they wanted to go southwards, it was really easy to basically take the Red Sea and basically sail downwards, go to African countries, and even go to other countries. And of course, even when it came to going even to the Persian Empire, it was considered a very strategic place. You control this area, you control the world. That's why right now Trump is saying, hey, we're going to control Gaza. We're going to take it over. Why? Because they recognize, one, okay, they found some gas resources there, natural gas, etc., but they recognize that this is a very important area to rule in order to control the Middle East. You have to control Gaza to control the Middle East. You got to control the Levant to control the Middle East, to control the world, to control basically the resources that, because if you're controlling this area, you're controlling Europe, you're controlling North Africa, and you're controlling the East. This is a main entrance. Okay, well, the Prophet ﷺ even recognized that. So he was basically aiming to the Bilad al-Sham and always talking about Bilad al-Sham as a key thing. And that doesn't mean the Yemenis didn't do a good job. Because when the Yemenis, they had become Muslim, certainly they actually did their homework in bringing Islam to the other countries. So it was the Yemenis that brought Islam. And of course, there Oman and Yemen, it was all of this was called Yemen. Even parts of Saudi, even parts of Saudi Arabia, all of that was called Yemen. Okay, so there's no such thing as United Arab Emirates at the time. There was no such thing as Oman. It was called al-Yamama. Okay, all of that was actually considered as Bilad al-Sham altogether was considered as Bilad al-Sham. Oops, I know you got something weird coming up. Let's see what happened. How do you do this? Oh dear, what do you do with it? Okay. So just to keep that one in mind, it's just so that we understand how all of this is basically working. Okay, so they used to go to Bilad al-Sham before Islam, and they would do tijara. It was basically an area of business. Why an area of business? Because it was easier to do business to Bilad al-Sham, easier to do business to Bilad al-Sham because, of course, the resources were easier to get. The Yemenis, on the other hand, when they had become Muslim, they were more familiar with how to go through the ocean to do their piece of homework. So they did an outstanding job. Yemenis were the ones that brought Islam to the Somalis, to Djibouti, to here's Djibouti right there, Eritrea, and certainly the different areas in Kenya, etc. And they were also the ones that brought Islam even to Malaysia. So think of that. They were the ones to bring Islam even to countries like Malaysia, Indonesia. It was through the Yemeni Muslims. And believe it or not, even if you were to look at Malaysian and Indonesian cultures, you could see, for example, the wrap around their waist, the culture, the certain foods, you could definitely see a Yemeni influence on the Malaysian and Indonesian cultures, and certainly if you were to, what's it called, the Sri Lanka, those areas, you could definitely see that resemblance. That's a different story. Okay, let's continue. So they came to Bilad al-Sham with their business, and that's when they basically had Mawla. When you look at a Mawla in this story right here, they didn't say Mawla, they just said Fata. So Fata could be a young man and could also be a Mawla, which basically would be a person. What is a Mawla? Il-Mawla could mean a slave person and could mean also a free slave that attributed to these people. So later, of course, even though he probably was free, but he still belonged to that family as a backup, as support. And it was this kind of, we talked about this. Okay. And Budayl ibn Abi Maryam. So I want you to look at this one. Here, the story said it wasn't Adi ibn, what was the other name? Adi ibn Badda, but the name said Budayl ibn Ubay ibn Abi Maryam. So is that the same person? You could see sometimes the names. Is that the name Ibn Abi Maria? Is that the Mawla Amr ibn al-As? Who really is this? You could see that sometimes the names can have differences of opinions in regard to that, but at the end is that he had a jamun min fidda, which is a utensil made of silver. We talked about that yesterday, and certainly that was considered, I guess, the main thing. That was the most valuable item. He gets sick, dies, basically makes that will, and he ordered them to basically tell the family that he had belonged to, what he had left behind, and give it to them. But of course, Tamim now confesses. After he had become Muslim, he said, when he had died, we took that utensil and we sold it for 1,000 dirham. So they sold it for 1,000 dirham. I wonder during our times, would probably, perhaps, maybe if we're talking about currency, it might actually cost like perhaps maybe $10,000 or so, perhaps something like that. And then anyhow, they basically split that money between him and Adi ibn Badda. They split it. And when they had come to their family, they basically gave them the cash. But then the people, they definitely recognized that there was this utensil that was a valuable utensil that was missing. They asked him about them, and they just said he didn't leave anything. But of course, they just claimed that there was only cash. But Tamim said, فلما أسلمت بعد قدوم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم المدينة تأثمت من ذلك. Okay. Tamim said, when I had become Muslim, after the Prophet ﷺ had come to Medina, I felt guilty for what I had done. And I came to the people, that is the family, and I told them what had happened. And I gave them back the 500 dirhams, basically the 50% of the price of what they had sold that jug for. And he told them and that his friend, basically it was a 50-50. And they came to the Prophet ﷺ, they found it, and then, of course, they had asked for the evidence, but they couldn't find it. And then he told them to search for it, but told them basically to also make the yameen, make that oath. And of course, they made the oath, and that's when, of course, when he had made the oath, but then it was later on that قام عمرو بن العاص ورجل آخر منهم. So Amr ibn al-As comes along and another man, and they basically had come to basically make an appeal. And that's when 500 dirhams were basically taken from him, and Adi ibn Badda as well. Okay, let's say Al-Waqidi, there's something about Al-Waqidi that I must say. Be careful with this one. Al-Waqidi, he basically mentions a lot of stories. The Orientalists love Al-Waqidi. You know why? Because Al-Waqidi, he wasn't always accurate in his storytelling. But Al-Waqidi, he was more of a storyteller, and a lot of the stories that he was mentioning were not necessarily the most authentic. But still, there were some interesting stories no one else mentioned but him. And these stories, of course, people love stories, so these stories, basically became the stories that people would remember because it's a lot easier to pass on a story. Oh, hold on. الزلمة هون؟ Oh, شغل البيت عشان بديش الزلمة يدخل. Doesn't that make sense? ايه بس Sorry about that. All right, so it's mentioning a lot of story. All right, so Al-Waqidi was mentioning a lot. Hi, Noura, are you the one that's muting me? Okay, so Al-Waqidi was mentioning a lot of stories that no other narrator was mentioning, and certainly the stories, they would be a lot easier to pass on. And because the story is a lot easier to pass on, it was very common that you basically had stories that were only found only in Kitab al-Maghazi for al-Waqidi. I'll give you a story. Remember the story of Khawla bint al-Azwar? Okay. What is the story of Khawla bint al-Azwar? So Khawla bint al-Azwar, it's a story that um that you could really make a movie out of. Okay. So what does the story say? That there was a battle and Khawla bint al-Azwar, she basically dresses in a man's clothes, goes, rides on this horse, participates in the battle, and everybody is shocked. Who is this strong knight that is coming into the battle, doing what no man can do? And then later it was discovered Khawla bint al-Azwar. Okay, this is nothing but a fable story. It's not mentioned in any books of Sirah. In fact, Durar ibn al-Azwar did not have a sister called Khawla bint al-Azwar. So the Khawla bint al-Azwar was not a person that existed in history, period. Okay. And of course, the story, I guess because it sounds very fascinating, it's a lot easier to pass on stories like that because it, I guess, inspires people in different ways, but it's not about how you say the story, it's about the resources, the authenticity, the verifying the story is no less of importance than the story itself. So Al-Waqidi, for example, was the only person that mentioned such a story. And scholars, when it comes to the stories that were mentioned in Al-Waqidi, they would always state those stories and would always, just put like a question mark that this is a place of question. The Orientalists, on the other hand, they absolutely love Al-Maghazi al-Waqidi. Absolutely love it because whenever you have something that is not verified, you're definitely going to see a lot of gaps in order to bring about the misconceptions. So they couldn't attack Islam by looking at the ayat and the Quran, all right? Because that's the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're not going to find gaps in it. All right. the sunnah, the authentic sunnah, in order for you to say a hadith or etc., it's basically a complete science. There's a way to verify. This is an authentic hadith. This is not an authentic hadith. Here's the narrator. This is da'if. This is sahih, etc. That's how I can tell you whether this is Islam or this isn't Islam. But when it came to al-Maghazi al-Waqidi, he didn't necessarily the mention the narrators and just says the story like that. So the Orientalists, they wanted to use that resource in particular to start attacking Islam from that book. And they will love that book. They love that book. So they'll go to that book and basically say, well, this is what the Prophet did. This is what Islam says. This is what it, and you will always see al-Maghazi al-Waqidi whenever you would go to the Orientalist books. You name the Orientalist, they will also always go for al-Maghazi al-Waqidi. And it was one of those books that were translated early. And of course, it was the main resource that they would always go to. And certainly you would find a lot of Muslims that are not aware of anything about al-Maghazi al-Waqidi. They would say, oh, al-Maghazi al-Waqidi, that's a reference of hadith, when they don't actually know that, no, that book is actually a book that is filled with many stories that have not been verified, many made up stories, many made up things. And therefore, just by saying I've got a reference and a page such and number such and the book of such, it does not make it authentic. So just be careful with this one. Okay, so can there be some stories that are probably authentic? Well, in order for me to consider that that story has some level of authenticity, then in that situation, I would need other resources to basically verify what was mentioned. Okay, so far when he said أن الآيات الثلاث, the three ayat, which is basically, let's say right there, this ayah, and this ayah. So now we're talking about these three ayat, about Tamim and Adi. He's not his direct brother, but akhi can be just a general statement to mean the two. La ilaha illallah. Oh no, what happened? Is everybody seeing what I'm doing? Oh, I thought, oh dear. Okay, are we still there? Yes. Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay. What happened? Noura, can you hear me? Okay. Okay, good. Sorry about that. All right. So they basically, okay, where was it? Okay. And they were basically going to Mecca, I guess their, for for their business. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he had migrated to Medina, they basically Khadima ibn Abi Maria. So now here's that figure again, Ibn Abi Maria, which basically was mentioned in the other narration, that his name was Budail Ibn Abi Maryam, or Ibn Abi Maria. So I want you to look at right there that it was called Ibn Abi Maryam or Maria. So you could see that there's the change in the name right there. Is it Maria? Is it Maryam? And let's see right there. And he says, in one of when you look at fi mim, in other words, in even some of the different manuscripts, it did say that his name was Ibn Abi Maryam and not necessarily Ibn Abi Maria. So now you could see that typos, or at least they weren't called typos, it was more of a hand, I guess a mistake in copying. You want to keep in mind that they were word by word. It was handwritten. So absolutely, you might have the person that wrote might actually have a mistake in writing things. And that's one thing, is that did this at all happen even when people were writing the Quran? Certainly it did. Certainly it did. It was possible that someone might write the Quran and you might find a manuscript that basically has a different thing. And we would say, well, because of course Quran was handwritten, but what Quran depended on was really that program of al-ijaza, and which basically is al-hifz, that what is called the tawatur, where you had these large numbers of people that would memorize the Quran. So right now, even if you were to burn the Qurans from all the different parts of the world, people are still going to have the Fatiha memorized, and they would be all capable of saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, give you the Fatiha and write it down, basically, even if it was basically erased, it's still inside the people's hearts. Okay. Anyhow, so Mawla Amr ibn al-As, so up until here, he agrees with all the other narrators, and they were going for Bilad Sham as a businessman, and Tamim and his brother were basically going. So Dhakar al-Hadith. So basically mentioned the same hadith, nothing new to it. Same thing if you were to look at a Naqash, basically had a pretty much like a similar story. All right. So I'm not going to go into all of that at the end. Some changes, probably what it really contained, and where he actually died, whether it's in the on the ship, or he was thrown in the sea, because he had died in the sea. Of course, he didn't want to leave a dead body and to decompose on the sea, so they needed to throw him. So all of those different pieces of information were not necessarily relevant to what we care about in terms of tafsir, but you might find some of those stories there. But to mention some of those stories, why am I mentioning this one? I'm mentioning this one is that some of those stories may have more information in one narration than another narration probably may not have. So just keep in mind that the different narrations, they could come from different resources, and they would be mentioned in other books, but this is not all relevant. So where and how he died and all of that, that's not really relevant, but it was still mentioned in certain stories, or at least in certain narrations. Let's continue right there. So فلما قدموا الشام مرض بديل وكان مسلما. Now this one is interesting. He said that Budayl, and which basically is right there, and when we talked about it, he had become Muslim, but not all scholars had basically agreed that he had become Muslim. Where did we get that from? Let's see. I'm gonna show you this resource, and let's go right there. I want you to see how we got to that information. Adi ibn Budayl. Okay, let's do it this way. Okay, I want you to look at this one. So this is Adi ibn, is it Adi ibn Budayl? Okay, hold on. No, did I choose the wrong name? Let's see again. Adi ibn Badda. Okay, not Budayl. Adi ibn Budayl is someone else. Okay. Adi ibn Badda. I'm going to say Adi ibn Badda. Okay, here we go. So I want you to look at Adi ibn Badda, and you could see, of course, not all of these are considerable resources, but let's look at some of those considerable resources. المعجم الكبير, let's see, Adi ibn Badda. So المعجم الكبير is a considerable resource. And what is really good about Islam Web, it basically had made a lot of the resources, the Islamic resources, available. So although you are going to Islam Web, but in reality, you're actually going to a main reference in Islamic books. It's called Al-Mu'jam al-Kabir for Tabarani. And they'll make it easy for you. They'll tell you the page number, and they'll give you the they'll give you the volume number and will basically tell you what exactly he had quoted. And instead of you going and getting all these huge volumes, they basically made it easy for you to find. And that's basically al-Maktaba in Islam Web. There are a number of different resources that you can go to. You can go to Al-Maktaba Shamila is a very important resource. It has over 200,000 volumes. Over 200,000 volumes, just imagine. So you don't even have to buy all these books anymore. They even have them scanned for you, like Al-Maktaba Al-Waqfiyya. They'll actually have the actual scan for these huge books and these huge volumes for you, and you can actually get it as a PDF, and you don't even have to buy them, okay? Okay, so let's see right there. الدرر السنية is a very good website because what they did, they really, it's a very good website. They'll give you the hadith and they'll tell you whether this is a hadith that is sahih. So here we go. These scholars in hadith, they went over the hadith and basically told you, okay, well, this is a chain of narration that is authentic. Here's the resource, here's the page number, and here's basically the takhrij. And plus, you can even get a translation for this. Okay, if you were to go to the Google Chrome, I don't have the Google Chrome open with me right now, but you can actually get that all translated. The translation is not always so accurate. The other good thing about the Mawsu'a al-Hadithiyya right there for Durar al-Saniyya is that if you don't understand the hadith, okay, if you don't understand the hadith, they'll basically give you a simplified modern language to explain the hadith for you. So this would be translated in a better translation for you than this, because this is way more classical. So then they'll go in a modern language, in a simplified explanation. They'll give you the detailed explanation for the hadith. Okay, you still didn't get me who Adi ibn Badda is. Here we go. This website, on the other hand, it's called Hadith Transmitters, did an outstanding job. It was a personal job. Someone, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let's see, he says, I pay $140 a month to host my website. If you wish to help, please donate. Please donate, because this person is doing just his own job. He was basically getting these resources to be available, and look what he had done. So if you were to want Adi ibn Badda, here we go. He said, Adi ibn Badda lahu suhba. So where did we get that from? So Ibn Hibban, the book Ithiqat is in almost 10 volumes, and now you don't have to get the whole volume. You just said, Adi ibn Badda lahu suhba. He said, I made it easy for you. This is exactly the quote that Ibn Hibban had said. Okay, let's see. What else? He said, another resource. Let's go to the other resource and see what else he had said. Abu Nu'aym al-Asbahani, in the book Ma'rifat al-Sahaba, he said just the story, but he didn't say, he said, كان عدي نصرانيا هو وتميم ولا يعرف لعدي إسلام. Now, what did he quote? He said, well, they were Christian, but according to Abu Nu'aym, we don't actually know whether Adi converted to Islam or not. Okay, and he said, ذكره بعض المتأخرين that سكن الكوفة. He said, other later scholars had mentioned that he had lived in al-Kufa in al-Iraq, but that's all we know. We don't really know whether he had become Muslim or not. Let's see. Ibn al-Athir with Usd al-Ghaba. That's almost in 5 volumes, but he just got you the name, the resource. It's, a bibliography right there. And he said Adi ibn Badda. And let's see, he just said the story. He didn't really, and here we go. He said لا يعرف العدي in Islam, basically quote from Abu Nu'aym, which is the earlier one that he said قلت والحق مع أبي نعيم. So what did Ibn al-Athir want to say? Ibn al-Athir, he said, well, although other people had said that he had become Muslim, he said, as a matter of fact, Abu Nu'aym, which is this resource, he said he's actually right. We don't, he said فإن الحديث فيه ما يدل على أنه لم يسلم. What the hadith is indicating is that he, that is Adi ibn Badda, did not actually convert to Islam, but because the Prophet ﷺ had ordered him to basically make that yameen, and what the hadith is indicating يدل على أنه غير مسلم, and which is also what the ayah is indicating, and which is آخران من غيركم. So that's a little, just some information for us to kind of learn how to go around and just understand this. So can we get this translated? You sure can. Right now, hey, we're in the world of AI. You can go to these three dots and basically ask that that website to translate it for you. I know Google Chrome basically has a very good, let's see, does this one have translation? So this is Microsoft Edge. I don't really know. I know I've seen it before. I know I had seen the Microsoft Edge even have translation before, but I can't find it here. I'll probably find it another time. I know Microsoft Edge does too. Okay, so this is just for us to kind of learn on what to do. Okay, so now we know, let's see, he said, وَكَانَ مُسْلِمًا. Okay, so who was Muslim? Well, basically the one that died. Okay, he was the one that was Muslim. Okay, قوله تعالى شهادة بينكم, that of course, wait a minute. So شهادة بينكم, where's the word? شهادة بينكم, here we go. شهادة بينكم إذا حضر أحدكم الموت. So يا أيها الذين آمنوا شهادة بينكم. Wait a minute. So what does shahada actually mean? Does shahada just mean to witness something, meaning certain people are standing there witnessing what's going on, or can the word shahada actually mean something else? So al-Qurtubi indicated that, well, it's not just al-Qurtubi, but in Lugha Arabiya, the word shahida can actually have different meanings. Why don't you look at that one? So in Lugha Arabiya and in the Quran, the word shahida can have different meanings, and this is what he said. And the ones that are highlighted to make it easy for you. And he said in the ayah, وَاسْتَشْهِدُوا شَهِيدَيْنِ مِنْ رِجَالِكُمْ. He said here is tashhidu. It doesn't necessarily mean to just get witnesses. It means that alif, sin, ta in Lugha Arabiya. Wait a minute. So what are you saying here? So whenever you are going to have a word that basically starts with alif and sin and ta, that basically means there's a request that is happening. Not always. This is one of the meanings, okay? This is not all the meanings, but this is one of the meanings. So istata'ama, meaning that they had requested food. Istashhidu, they requested that the witnesses would be present. Okay? Istashhidu, right there, that they requested that they would be present. Istaghfiru, they requested forgiveness. Okay? So now we just get that alif sin ta. Okay? Let's see. ومنها شهد بمعنى قضى. And he said shahida could also mean to inform. شهد بمعنى قضى, to inform. أشهدهم على أنفسهم. أشهدهم على أنفسهم, does that mean made them witnesses upon themselves? No. Let them know. Okay, and let's see. شهد الله أنه لا إله إلا هو. So when we say شهد الله أنه لا إله إلا هو, is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala became a witness on himself? No. It's that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know. He's informing you. But so why did the word shahida? Well, that's what we're trying to say. We're trying to say that the word shahida can have multiple meanings. The word shahida can mean to bring forth, can also mean to inform, can also mean to confess, can also mean to bear witness. can also mean to admit. So now we know that the ayah, when it said Shahid Allah, it's not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a witness. شهد الله بمعنى أعلم الله بمعنى meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is informing you that there's no God worthy of worship but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's see. Shahida could also mean aqarra. Aqarra means to confess or can mean to admit and could also mean to affirm. Okay, shahida, to affirm something. Let's say which is like وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ يَشْهَدُونَ. الملائكة يشهدون. So الملائكة يشهدون, does that mean that they're right there witnessing all of this? No, that basically means that even the malaika are living in this faith. They're affirming, they're confessing, they're basically believing in all of this. So والملائكة يشهدون, not that the malaika were witnesses as if it's a trial. No, that the malaika themselves يشهدون to mean that they too are in faith of this. They too are affirming this. They too are embracing all of this. وَمِنْهَا شَهِدَ بِمَعْنَى حَكَمَ. Shahida could also mean not to witness, but could also mean to decree. To decree. So just think of that. قال الله تعالى وشهد شاهد من أهلها. In the ayah in Surah Yusuf, شهد شاهد من أهلها does not necessarily mean that there was necessarily a witness, a baby crying that basically cried or said anything. شهد شاهد من أهلها بمعنى حكمة. That basically of course, what is the context of this ayah? The context of this ayah, the king basically saw his wife, the queen, of course, he said if Yusuf's qamis, if his garment was torn from the back, that means he was trying to run away. You were the one that was trying to seduce him. If it was torn from the front, that means he was trying to seduce you and or probably molest you, but then you ripped it. But if it's ripped from the back, that means no, he was trying to basically run away. So shahida shahidun min ahliha, in other words, that was the king that basically had ruled that this is how we're going to judge in this case, and he shahida bima'na hakama, to mean that he had decreed in family that, hey, this is how we're going to rule this case, and therefore he basically came to the conclusion that she is the one that was guilty. Okay, let's see. Shahida bima'na halafa. Shahida could also mean to make an oath. How's that? Said, well, just like in al-li'an. In al-li'an, what is al-li'an? So al-li'an, if the husband accuses his wife of cheating, okay, and let's just say he had literally seen her cheat on him. This isn't some messaging to this random guy or him seeing her going out with somebody. No, he is seeing her, let's say, mutalabbisa, in the state of zina with another man. And then she claimed that that's not true. You're confusing all of this, etc. But of course, he basically would come forward, make 5 oaths that he had seen her cheating on him, etc. So that's a li'an. Okay? Make 5 oaths. And she, on the other hand, would make 5 oaths that if she is honest, but if she knows herself that she's not honest, well, just admit that this man is basically honest and don't make that oath. That's a li'an. Because an ghadib Allah alayha would be basically ghadab. It would be basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala discontent over that the liar, whether it's the man that made up the lie or whether the woman that made up the lie. At the end, this is basically the word that was used is that shahida. is shahida to mean حلف. Okay, let's see. شهد بمعنى وصى. شهد could also mean to make a will. So how is that? يا أيها الذين آمنوا شهادة بينكم. شهادة بينكم. So what is شهادة بينكم here? شهادة بينكم بمعنى وصى. Here's the word that is the key word right there. شهادة بينكم to mean that there was a wasiyah, that there was a will that was done as شهادة بينكم. And some scholars actually said, and you remember the word قيل, that is in لغة عربية للتضعيف, that is to indicate that al-Qurtubi at least, who was basically the book that we're, the reference that we're using, that he had said, it was said. What does that mean? It was to indicate that he doesn't have the evidence to verify that, but it was said, indicating that it's probably not authentic. That what does it mean? الحضور للوصية, that it was to be present for a certain will. And that's why basically يا أيها الذين آمنوا شهادة بينكم. In other words, if you were present for a particular situation where the person was dying, إذا حضر أحدكم الموت, the person was dying, you were saying it doesn't have to be right now, basically dying, but the person was dying, you before the person's death, you basically were the only witness in regards to a certain circumstance, and you want to bring forth that witness of yours. You wanted to bring forth the information that you had known. So that's what shahada would mean in this context. So now, to summarize, we could see that the word shahada has multiple meanings. Just like in Lugha Arabiya, you can have certain words that can have multiple meanings. Not only shahada, ta'am could mean food, ta'am could also mean provide, ta'am could mean rizq, could mean provision, just different. Ta'am could even be a metaphorical meaning as well. So just keep that one in mind, that Arabic is a very intricate language. And even if you were to have one word, now imagine if you were to have compound words. ضرب في الأرض. ضرب just in general. And so, I mean, just like in English, you would have a driveway, you could have what else? A pathway, you could have what else? Right now, you know, and the driveway to the Brits is completely different than the driveway to the American language or accent, and certainly to the Australians, etc. They each one would have their own accent, their own language, and certainly compound words would basically give different meanings. Okay, same thing in Lugha Arabiya. Same thing in Lugha Arabiya. Lugha Arabiya is a very rich language, so just for us to learn. Let's see. ذهب الطبري. Who's الطبري? الطبري is, we mentioned him before. الطبري basically has, so look into it, right? Tafseer al-Tabari. I want you to look at that one. Sorry, I'm sitting in a different way and it's not allowing me to type in right. Okay, here we go. So Tafseer al-Tabari, I want you to look at that one. Images right there. It's almost in 10 volumes. We'll go 7 volumes. This one's giving it in what, 13 volumes, 12 volumes? And this one. So this is Tafseer al-Tabari. What's actually good about Tafseer al-Tabari? And it's, in fact, one of the most important earliest tafsir. It's way earlier by almost 400 or 500 years than Tafsir al-Qurtubi. Tabari himself died 110, if I'm not mistaken. 110 Hijri, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't mention here when he had died. But Tafsir al-Tabari, what's actually, this one is mukhtasar, this one is just a summary. Okay, what's interesting about Tafsir al-Tabari is that he basically goes into the tafsir based on what is called al-ma'thur. That's why he tell you جامع البيان عن تأويل القرآن. What does it mean, جامع البيان عن تأويل القرآن? In other words, he goes and narrates all those narrations in regards to each and every single thing. So even if he wanted to say ash-shahada bima'na al-yamin, he'll tell you all those resources to prove just one word. He can take 10 pages in mentioning different narrations just to basically mention one point. It could be just one point. Ash-shahada bima'na al-yamin, and he might list like 20 ahadith that supports this conclusion. Ash-shahada bima'na al-yamin would be just this little piece. Ash-shahada bima'na al-yamin, and he'll probably list you maybe 7, 8, 10 pages just to prove this point, because that's a very critical point. And he'll list all those narrations just to prove a point. Okay, so he said, فَيَكُونُ الْمَعْنَى يَمِينُ مَا بَيْنَكُمْ. Why did you want to say that it was an oath? So he said, well, if we were to say that this is an oath, he said that would mean this is telling the believers that there would be an oath to make when, and if you were present, when there was a will that was done by a dying person, then that shahada, it's not enough to say, I had seen, but we need an oath from you. Well, what is an oath anyways? So an oath basically means that you are asking, or at least you are putting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the witness on you. So how does that go? It can look like by saying wallahi, billahi, or tallahi. Wait, how do you do that? Hold on. Can you write that down? Sure. It can be wallahi. Wallahi, for example, this is what happened. Or it can be billahi, or it can be tallahi. All of those. Can we add more onto that? Yes. وَالَّذِي رَفَعَ السَّمَاوَاتِ بِغَيْرِ عَمَدٍ وَرَبِّ الْكَعْبَةِ. All of those, they're considered as a way of oath. So what if we're doing this? This on itself, on its own, there are, remember when we did before, we said amen, that they're basically oaths, and that there are 3 different types of oaths. There's al-yamin al-munaqida, basically the yamin that a person would make. Maybe we could take it right down right there. Yamin al-munaqida, a yamin that a person has the intention to make. And let's say, wallahi, I'm going to eat knafa today, for example. Okay, you could see I'm craving knafa. Okay, there we go. That's basically yamin munaqida. Okay, and there is yamin al-laghu. That's basically the kind of yamin that you don't mean anything with it, and you're probably just a habit, and they would be talking and wallahi, and they didn't really mean to make a yamin. They just have it as a habit, kind of like a Somali way. The aunties, all those hoyos, they'd be like wallahi, 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 and you're wondering like, why are you making a yamin? Did you really need to confirm it? No, that's a yamin lahu. They didn't have it. It wasn't necessarily an intentional yamin. And there's yamin al-ghamus. What is yamin al-ghamus? Yamin al-ghamus would be that type of yamin that a person lied about their witness. Okay? The person lied about their witness, and that would be yamin al-ghamus. Asma, you rose your hand, dear. Go ahead. You have a question.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
I can hear you, dear.
Yeah, my question is, the yamin where you just say it, like you gave the example of the Somali auntie. Um, is people I say wallah a lot, and I've heard like a few times that you're not supposed to say that. Is it permissible to do like that? Is it not
It's
befitting to
permissible.
just
You
say
don't have
wallah
to
a
be
lot?
Somali to make yamin al-lahu.
Is it like somewhat wrong? Because I've heard people
No, it's
scrutinize that.
not. It's lahu. But
Okay.
it's lahu. It's I guess just a habit of saying wallahi, when you don't really mean to make a yamin. People are inviting you to dinner, you're like, wallahi, alhamdulillah, I'm good. even though you're probably hungry, but you're like, Wallah, alhamdulillah, I'm good. It's a word you didn't even think about. It really slipped out of your mouth. You didn't really mean to make an oath. It just slipped out of your mouth. Okay? So that's a yamin lahu. Go ahead, dear.
What about just saying it in general? Like I could be told, I'm not even swearing on something. I could just be like, Wallah, this, like just saying Wallah, is that okay?
Yeah,
Like,
it is. It's permissible. Like I said, it's a
okay,
yamin lahu. What is yamin lahu?
okay.
Yamin lahu, it's like a slip of, the slip of tongue. You're just constantly saying wallahi, but it's just part of the sentence. Just like in English, for example, they could be, at least in the American accent, when they're talking, sometimes they're not finding the right word. They would be saying or ah, those sounds. Just like right now, I'm just doing it. Okay, you don't necessarily mean something with it, and it becomes just like those pauses. Man, now I'm doing it even more frequently. All right, so you don't necessarily mean anything with it. It's just a slip of tongue. So it's just my mind just slipping out a word, wallahi, even though I don't really mean anything with it. Sometimes, why do we actually say wallahi, even though we don't mean much with it? Sometimes it's to express a certain feeling. Just like, for example, when say, you're doing this sound, it's not that you're trying to obstruct other people and make white noise. You're not trying to make white noise to obstruct people from hearing you. It's the sound of you processing certain information. And it's not necessarily processing only certain information, but sometimes people might say wallahi to, I guess, sometimes hide a certain feeling that they don't necessarily want to express. And sometimes they would, at least in the Arabic culture, sometimes it's to hide a certain feeling, sometimes to show a certain embarrassment, sometimes to show a rejection, but you don't really want to voice it. And sometimes it's just an expression to make a conversation. Sometimes it's just more of, I would say added words to make the conversation. It's kind of strange how I could express why Arab would use yamin al-laghu often. I don't know about Somalis and why these aunties are constantly saying wallahi. I don't understand the language. So I wouldn't really be able to understand and scrutinize what and why and when is wallahi used so frequently, at least in the Somali culture. I don't know. So that would be really interesting. What hides behind wallahi? All right. So in the end, what we care about is yamin al-laghu, regardless of whether it's a sentiment you're hiding or it's a certain word that you're probably fillers in probably a sentence. Perhaps it's a filler, perhaps it's a filler in a communication. Who knows what it is, but it would be really interesting to scrutinize when is that culture using these yamin al-laghu. What we care about is that yamin al-laghu is not necessarily a yamin that requires complete honesty in it, because it was not intentional as a yamin. It wasn't as an intentional yamin. It wasn't something that you had put really Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as your witness, and it was just a slip of the tongue, or probably just words that are fillers within your sentence. Okay. And what these fillers mean and all of that, it'd be probably an interesting study that someone might do. Okay. Let's continue. Ibn Atiyah al-Andalusi, of course. And he said, Ash-Shahada is to basically indicate that it is something to be recorded, it is something to be preserved, and then later it would be basically presented. Okay, but then he basically considered ضعف كونها بمعنى الحضور واليمين. But Ibn Atiyah basically did not agree with the interpretation that it was to bring the witnesses or to make an oath, but he said it's basically to get that documentation, that preservation of that meaning. Okay, so here's what I'll do. There's a lot more to say about the ayat, of course, but it's important to take little portions, process it. I'll let you process Yameen. I'll let you process the Shahada. I'll let you process المغازي للواقدي. We had a lot of information that was said today. So inshallah subhanakallah wa bihamdik nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilaik nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. MashaAllah, we got a good number of attendees today. I know you could see nothing but a white block on the side or a black block. That's basically Siddiqa Ghazi is here. Well, there we go. When we have a vibe of Yemeni vibes, we gotta love them, right? And mashallah,
وعليكم السلام.
يسعد الحلو إلهي يا ربي إلهي يا ربي يعطيك الرزق وين ما كنت إلهي يا ربي
آمين
عليك
آمين.
حبيبة قلبي الله يرضى
Wow,
عنك يا
it's
رب.
been so long. Salam alaikum.
وعليكم السلام Noura, how are you? Miss you guys.
Oh my gosh, we miss you.
I miss you
I know.
too.
Maybe I should stop the recording. That way we can have
Oh,
our
we're
little
on the recording. Oh.
girly thing. Hold on.
Sorry.
I don't even know how to do this anymore.